In 1878, the Blackwood brothers survived a plague that claimed dozens. But they didn't escape it. They became something else. Something not quite human. Something science still refuses to touch. Not because there are no answers, but because the answers are too dangerous to speak. And what happened in Cedar Ridge wasn't just a sickness. It was a transformation, one that left 4 men untouched by death, but twisted in ways no man was ever meant to endure. This isn't just a tale of survival. It's a descent into spiritual possession, forbidden science, and the death of the human soul. And if you make it to the end of this video, you'll understand why every medical record was sealed, why every church record was burned, and why the name Blackwood was erased from history itself. You're not supposed to be here. This story was meant to stay buried. But now that you've stepped through the door, there is no going back. Let's begin. It started like any other Kansas summer. Hot, dry, humming with locusts and a scent of scorched wheat. But on July 15th, 1878, something changed in the town of Cedar Ridge. It wasn't the heat. It wasn't the storms. It was the silence. The first to fall was Sarah Hartman. Healthy in the morning, dead before dawn. Doctors said typhoid, but the symptoms weren't right. The fever too fast. The death too strange. And worst of all, her eyes kept opening long after she had died. Over the next weeks, 47 people died, and none of them lasted more than 24 hours from the first sign of illness. But not the Blackwoods. They walked through the plague like it wasn't there, a storm that bent around them, an infection that refused to touch their skin. To the town, it was a miracle. To the brothers, it was a message. But what they believed was divine favor was something else entirely. They thought they were chosen, but they were being marked. And the real question isn't how they survived. It's what they became. They say God tests the faithful. But the test the Blackwood brothers faced in the summer of 1878 wasn't divine. It was ancient, older than any gospel, older than the church, older than man. After 47 deaths in less than a month, Cedar Ridge had collapsed into something just short of madness. Doors stayed locked. Families whispered about curses, demons, sins come due, and the smell of death hung in the air, thicker than the heat. Yet the Blackwoods thrived. Their fields stayed golden, their cattle untouched, their health perfect. But when Josiah Blackwood stepped into town on August 11th, no one cheered. No one thanked him, because something in his face had changed. His once warm eyes were now cold, unreadable, not tired, emptied. He told Dr. Morrison he had come to help, but it wasn't help he brought. It was contact. Josiah sat beside the sick and dying, touched their foreheads, spoke in tongues. Languages of fevered patients began echoing in their delirium, words that didn't exist in English, Greek, or Latin. Dr. Morrison began hearing them in his sleep. Patterns, syllables, structures so precise they felt engineered. The disease had been random, chaotic, until Josiah touched it. Then it began to organize. The victims no longer died scattered and at random. They began to die in groups, in patterns, as if something was measuring, adjusting, responding. That's when Ezra Blackwood took it further. He slaughtered a calf from their herd, drained its blood, and painted something, a glyph, on the walls of their private chapel. The symbol did not come from Scripture. It came from something before Scripture, something Josiah claimed had revealed itself to him in prayer. A new name, a higher law. The glyph looked like a twisted crown made of bone, with an eye at its center. That night, Abel claimed he saw the symbol glowing with blue fire during evening worship. He screamed for 3 hours and refused to sleep in the farmhouse again. 3 days later, the disease stopped. Completely, instantly, like it had received an answer. And that's when the brothers changed. They stopped eating. Their skin became cold. Their eyes, once pale blue, began reflecting light like those of an animal at night. And worst of all, when they prayed together, the words echoed, not in the chapel, but inside the skulls of anyone who heard them. It began with whispers, not spoken, but felt, like thoughts that weren't yours, breathing behind your ears. Neighbors described it as pressure in the skull, a low hum that turned into a voice if you stood too close to the Blackwood chapel. They weren't imagining it. By the end of August, those who passed near the Blackwood property reported strange sensations. Nosebleeds, headaches, nausea, and visions. Visions of things that didn't belong in Kansas. Mountains made of bone, rivers that ran backward, and a tower of flesh rising into a black sky that bled stars like open wounds. No one wanted to talk about what they saw, but no one forgot it. Inside the farmhouse, something had broken. The brothers stopped speaking to anyone outside their circle. Even Ezra, the most suspected of the four, no longer met a man's eye in town. When asked about the illness, he only said, "It has been replaced." Josiah stopped attending the chapel altogether. Instead, he began spending long hours in the old root cellar beneath the farmhouse. Neighbors later described strange chanting rising from the earth. Sometimes 2 voices, sometimes 8, but there were only 4 brothers. Caleb, the logical one, burned all his ledger books. All of them, years of careful records, gone in a single night. When asked why, he said, "None of it matters now. The math has changed. The harvest isn't ours anymore." They began keeping livestock not for milk or meat, but for blood. Goats, calves, even chickens, all slaughtered with ceremonial precision. The blood collected and carried, not to the fields, but into the chapel. The brothers didn't eat, didn't sleep, didn't age. And then came the shadows. The local pastor, Reverend Whitlock, was the first to speak of it publicly. He had seen Ezra one evening at dusk. The man had walked along the church fence line as the sun set behind him, but his shadow, it went the wrong direction, toward the light, stretched and contorted like something tethered to an entirely different source of gravity. By September, the town was split. Some wanted to confront the brothers. Others said to leave them be, because something more powerful than plague had claimed them. And if they were spared, it was only because they had agreed to become something else, something inhuman. September 9th, 1878. That was the night everything broke. 3 boys from town, Daniel Miller, age 14, his brother Eli, 12, and their friend Henry Lockhart, decided to sneak onto the Blackwood property. They're gone wrong. Childhood curiosity twisted into horror. They never made it past the tree lean. Henry Lockhart was the only one who survived. He ran into town at dawn barefoot, eyes wide, covered in blood that wasn't his. He couldn't stop screaming. His mouth foamed with spittle as he repeated the same phrase over and over. "They were waiting for us." Dr. Morrison sedated him and kept him locked in the back room of the clinic for 5 days. When Henry finally calmed, he spoke of what he saw. He said the brothers weren't sleeping in their house anymore. They had moved their beds into the chapel, but they didn't lie on them. They sat upright all night, unblinking, mouths open in silent song. And behind them on the chapel wall, that same glyph Ezra painted weeks earlier was now pulsing, glowing, moving, not with light, with something inside the wall. And what lived there wasn't from this world. The 2 missing boys, Daniel and Eli, were never found. That night, 3 men from the town armed themselves with rifles and lanterns. They marched toward the Blackwood farm with purpose. One was James Patterson, whose twin daughters had died weeks earlier. Another was Benjamin Hartman, still grieving his wife. The third was Reverend Whitlock. They never spoke publicly about what they saw. Only Whitlock ever wrote it down in a letter to Kansas City Diocese sealed for over a century. The letter reads, "We found them kneeling before the altar, not praying, but feeding. Their mouths were open, their eyes rolled back. Their skin glowed from beneath like lanterns made of thin flesh. Something hung above the altar, not flesh, not spirit. It knew we were there, and it showed us things I cannot write." 2 days later, Reverend Whitlock resigned his post. 1 month after that, he took his own life. The church burned down a year later, but not by accident. The Methodist elders gathered one final time. They burned every page mentioning the Blackwood name, ripped it from sermons, tore from birth ledgers, scratched it off cemetery stones. They believed, somehow, that forgetting them was a kind of exorcism, but it was already too late. Because the brothers were changing, again, by the autumn equinox, Even the land began to reject them. The wheat stopped growing near the chapel. The soil turned black, wet, veined. Birds avoided the property entirely. Even flies wouldn't land on the farmhouse walls. And yet, the Blackwood brothers thrived. They no longer wore shoes. They no longer bathed. They walked barefoot to the tainted soil, whispering to themselves in perfect unison. Ezra no longer spoke at all. But when he looked at you, it felt like your memories were being read. People began reporting dreams about him. The same dream. You're in the chapel. You're lying on the altar, and Ezra stands over you, holding a book that bleeds when he turns its pages. Every dream ended the same way. He speaks a word you've never heard before. And when you wake up, you remember it, in your own voice. These weren't just dreams. They were rituals. Because the brothers weren't praying anymore. They were converting, not people, but minds, changing the thoughts of the entire town, one dream at a time. And then something worse happened. On October 3rd, Dr. Morrison disappeared, gone without a trace. His notes, however, remained, pages torn, ink smudged, but still legible. His final entry? Their blood contains non-human proteins, iridescent under light, alive, self-replicating. I took a sample. I should not have. My thoughts are no longer mine. There is a second voice, and it is older than time. That same day, a Kansas State Medical Board official arrived unannounced in Cedar Ridge, sent after a string of increasingly panicked letters from Dr. Morrison. He interviewed townsfolk, examined the seal well, and approached the Blackwood farm. He was never seen again. 2 days later, 4 men in black suits arrived from Topeka. They didn't wear badges. They didn't give names. They confiscated Dr. Morrison's files, paid off the local sheriff, and issued a quarantine on the Blackwood property. But what they really did was build a fence, 10 feet high, barbed wire, encircling the entire farm. No warnings, no signage, just a silent barrier around the brothers and whatever they were becoming. And then they left. The town was told to forget, to say nothing, to pretend the Blackwoods had never come. But the people never forgot, because the fence didn't keep the brothers in. It kept something else from getting out. By November, the Blackwoods were no longer recognized as men. They had become something the townspeople whispered about. The 4 that sleep standing. They hadn't been seen eating. They hadn't been seen sleeping. And yet their bodies remained strong, untouched by time or decay. What remained behind that barbed wire fence wasn't a farm. It was a sanctum, a domain. And in the heart of it, the chapel, once a symbol of piety, had become a throne room for something ancient. One night, Thomas Fletcher, the blacksmith whose son had been healed by Josiah, claimed he heard singing from across the prairie. Not music, not melody, but a perfect harmonic vibration, like glass on the edge of shattering. He wasn't the only one. Across Cedar Ridge, dozens of people reported the same thing. Voices that weren't voices, resonating inside their bones. Infants cried for hours. Dogs howled until they bled. And church bells rang on their own. The town gathered for an emergency meeting. Men armed with rifles. Women clutching rosaries. But there was no plan. Because how do you plan against what you don't understand? Against what might not even be alive? And then the storm came. November 9th, 1878. No clouds. No wind. No rain. Just light. Flashes of blue-white fire tore across the sky directly above the Blackwood property. For 2 hours, the air shimmered with ozone. The ground trembled, as if beneath the weight of something descending. When it ended, every lantern in town went dark. Every clock stopped, and every mirror cracked down the center. Reverend Whitlock's abandoned home was found with every page of his Bible torn out, except one. Leviticus 10, verses 1 to 2. And fire went out from the Lord and devoured them, and they died before the Lord. 3 days later, the fence around the Blackwood farm had changed. It wasn't rusted anymore. It was new, stronger, barbed shaped like sigils. The kind Josiah once carved into the chapel pews. No one had rebuilt it. It had rebuilt itself. And inside the fence, movement. But no one saw the brothers. Only their shadows, walking the land as if the flesh no longer mattered, and the land, once black and dead, had begun to bloom again. But what grew there wasn't wheat. It pulsed, it shimmered, it watched. There's a moment when something crosses a threshold from human to other that no language can capture. It's not in the eyes, it's not in the flesh, it's in the silence, the way it lingers, too long, too still, like it's waiting for your soul to flinch. By late November 1878, the Blackwood brothers no longer appeared during daylight, but they were seen at night, not walking, floating. Neighbors who lived within a mile of the farm began locking their doors not because they feared disease, but because they feared the music. Low tones, like throats singing, vibrated across the prairie in the hours between 2 and 4 a.m. The notes weren't random. They followed a pattern, almost mathematical, building toward something, a summoning. One witness described seeing Abel Blackwood standing at the edge of his field, eyes open, mouth closed, but the sound was coming from him, and he wasn't alone. 3 figures stood beside him, cloaked in moonlight, faces covered in white ash. Not the brothers. Something else. When approached, the figures simply folded inward like collapsing shadows and disappeared. After that night, the crops nearest to the fence grew teeth. Literally. The local schoolteacher, Mary Fielding, wrote in her journal, "The grass near the Blackwood property grows white, and the heads of wheat curl like fingers. When I touched one, it bled." Dr. Morrison's clinic was raided a second time, but not by the government, by men in red sashes, unmarked wagons. They took every specimen jar, every page of notes, and left behind a single document sealed in black wax. Only 3 words stamped across the front. Classified, Eden Code. We still don't know what Eden Code is, but it appears in declassified DARPA files from the 1980s. Linked to non-human frequency phenomena, linked to cognitive resonance anomalies, and always connected containment zones. But here's the part they never told you. In 1954, a classified military map of Kansas labeled the Blackwood property as Zone 0. Not Area 0. Zone. That label is used for one thing only: territories of origin, where something came into this world that was never meant to. And that brings us to you. Yes, you watching this. If you made it this far, you're not just curious. You're being pulled. So pause just for a moment and comment this phrase twice below to lock in what you now become. I do not cast a shadow. I do not cast a shadow. It is more than a phrase. It is an initiation. From this point forward, the story fractures, because every record, every journal, letter, government file, and whispered account disagrees. It's as if time itself bent around the Blackwood farm. What happened inside the fence didn't follow our rules anymore. Days went missing. Seasons folded in on themselves. And people forgot, or tried to. But there are 3 surviving accounts, each wildly different. Each told by a man who claimed to have witnessed the final transformation of the brothers. And all 3 died within 48 hours of giving their testimony. The first came from a federal agent named Ellis Warren, assigned in 1903 to investigate abandoned quarantine sites across the Midwest. He kept a private journal, now locked in the Smithsonian's restricted archives. But a single page was leaked in 1979. The chapel no longer has walls. It is open to the sky, but the sky is wrong. I saw stars I cannot name. The brothers were there, naked, hairless, eyes black as oil. They sang in chords no throat could produce. The air itself twisted. One looked at me. I forgot my name. The second account came from Father Lucien Armand, a defrocked French exorcist who arrived in Cedar Ridge in 1911 claiming divine guidance. He believed the Blackwoods were the antithesis of sainthood. Not demons, not possessed, but post-human vessels for something pre-creation. He conducted a ritual at the fence line. 3 days later, he was found crucified upside down in his hotel room, not with nails, with words, carved into the flesh of his arms, legs, and torso in Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic, and something unidentifiable. The third account came from Henry Lockhart. Yes, the same boy who ran from the woods in 1878. In 1924, as an old man, he recorded an interview with a Yale anthropologist. His final words were captured on wax cylinder. It wasn't that the brothers changed. It's that they stopped pretending. They weren't men who became monsters. They were monsters who once wore the faces of men. And when the sky cracked open that night, they went home. But something else came out. The audio cuts off with a high-frequency tone that caused permanent hearing loss in the technician who transcribed it. All three testimonies agree on one thing. The Blackwood brothers didn't die. They transcended. And the chapel, whatever it had become, was no longer a building. It was a door. And it's still there, still open. Most stories end at the grave. This one begins after. Because what passed through the Blackwood brothers was not death. It was continuation, but in a direction no man was meant to walk. In 1946, under the cover of post-war infrastructure expansion, a covert military survey was conducted across Kansas, Nebraska, and Missouri. The operation was known internally as Project Choir. Its objective? To map electromagnetic anomalies that disrupted radio signals and affected pilot navigation. They found 23 sites with minor interference, but only one with a full blackout radius, the Blackwood property. The instruments didn't malfunction. They screamed, literally. Field radios picked up frequencies that translated into human screams, spoken in reverse Latin, repeating only 3 words, et filii dormiant, and the sons sleep. But sleep was never the point, because in the center of the blackout zone, where the chapel once stood, Project Choir engineers discovered a spiral, burned into the prairie, precisely 333 feet across. A crop formation made not by crushing, but by molecular alteration. The grass there was no longer cellulose. It was silicon and humming. The engineers approached. 2 never returned. The third came back naked, silent, and missing every tooth in his mouth. He drew only one thing before dying. A symbol, the same glyph Josiah had painted in blood on the chapel wall. It appears in Babylonian star charts. It appears in Enochian grimoires. It appears in CIA remote viewing documents from the Stargate project. It means threshold. In 1967, MKUltra files, long believed to focus only on mind control, referenced a Kansas doorway in a black site briefing. The note reads, subject exposure Blackwood signal causes irreversible ego dissolution within 72 hours. Hallucinations match ancient accounts of divine visitation. Containment priority, red omega. They weren't studying madness. They were studying arrival. Arrival of what? Something that had worn the brothers like clothes. Something that learned through them, moved through them until it no longer needed them. And now it waits. Because that door, the one built from limestone, blood, and belief, is not closed. It pulses. It calls. And every 33 years, it opens a little wider. The last time was 2011. The next, 2044. We're not preparing for the unknown. We're preparing for the return. Step carefully now, because this is the part where most turn back. Not because they don't believe, but because they do. The spiral at the center of the Blackwood property isn't just a formation. It's a recording device. But not for sound, not for images, for souls. In 1982, a private team of geophysicists funded by a think tank under Stanford Research Institute attempted core drilling at the spiral center. They never reached bedrock, because the deeper they drilled, the less resistance they found, as if the earth beneath the chapel had been hollowed. After 93 feet, the drill stopped making contact. It just fell. The rig collapsed in on itself. 3 men died. And on the final reel of seismic readout, there were no earth layers, no shale, no limestone, no granite. Only a frequency, a tone. But this wasn't a sound made by the machine. It was broadcasting back. One technician described it as, like something was listening. And then it replied, with my mother's voice. She'd been dead 20 years. After that incident, the land was seized by a newly formed agency, Office of Temporal Stabilization, a division of the U.S. government that does not officially exist. Their first act? covering the spiral with an artificial grain field, sensors embedded beneath, motion detectors on every border, satellite surveillance from above. But what are they watching for? Not who enters, who leaves, because the Blackwood brothers were never buried. No grave markers, no death certificates. Yet their DNA appeared in a 2021 Kansas State Prison database. All 4 profiles. Ezra, Caleb, Josiah, Abel, perfect matches, and all tied to one inmate, a boy born in 2004, raised in a foster system. No medical history, no parents, except in his dreams. He speaks fluent Proto-Sumerian, and he draws the chapel, exactly, in detail, stone for stone. When questioned by state psychologists, he simply said, "I was born here, but not yet. Not yet, because the door doesn't close forward. It closes backward. Time itself is bleeding at the edges. That spiral in the grass? It isn't a scar. It's a clock. And when it strikes midnight again, the brothers won't return. They'll awaken because they never left. They just sank beneath, then stepped down. But understand, this descent isn't physical. You're not walking into a basement. You're slipping beneath consensus reality. And once your eyes adjust to what lies there, you will never see this world the same way again. The spiral beneath the chapel isn't a staircase. It's a filter, one that strips away illusion. That's why no satellite can map it. That's why digital recordings glitch, why compasses spin, why even memory fractures near the site. Because the moment you cross into its radius, something happens that modern science still has no name for. You become visible to them. Who are they? Not demons, not aliens, not spirits. Those are words we made up to protect ourselves. What came through the Blackwoods, what changed them, is older than any of our myths. They are called, in the only language that fits, the witnesses. They do not think. They observe. But what they observe, they change. And what they change, they own. In 1993, a Soviet defector named Anatoly Venediktov fled to the U.S. with a single item in his possession, a golden disc, etched with concentric spirals and symbols matching the ones on the Blackwood altar. He claimed it had been recovered from a Siberian dig site known only as K Sector 7, a mirror location to the Kansas spiral. According to Anatoly, the structures are identical, the atmospherics, identical, the loss of time, the bleed-throughs, the sleep chanting. It's not a site, it's a network. These are nodes in a lattice that spans the earth, buried beneath what we call reality. The witnesses, they aren't here to visit. They're here to harvest, but not your flesh, not your blood. They want your obedience. They erode belief layer by layer until you kneel willingly, until you question nothing, until your memories belong to them. And that's the secret behind the Blackwood brothers. They weren't chosen. They were volunteers, men of unshakable faith, men willing to bleed for an idea so sacred they mistook possession for a purpose. And now, through them, the witnesses study us, using the spiral as a lens, watching who looks too long, who asks the wrong questions, who follows the story to its bitter, blinding end. So I ask you, before we go deeper, are you still watching? Are you still here because you're brave, or because something in you already belongs to them? Beneath the chapel, there is no light, not because it's dark, but because light refuses to enter. The Blackwoods didn't build the chapel to worship in. They built it to hide what was already there. Stone by stone, prayer by prayer, they cloaked an entrance to something that does not sleep, to something that waits. Local legends whisper of it long before 1878. The Osage called the land the Mushkiew, the place that watches back. Even they wouldn't settle near it. No hunting, no travel, no fire, just offerings, skulls of deer left in circles, bundles of teeth wrapped in black cloth, always facing the eastern wind. So when the Blackwoods came, faith drunk, brilliant, disciplined, they didn't discover the chapel site. They were summoned to it. Josiah knew. You can see it in his journals, those not confiscated by the state. In one entry, scrawled in frantic, almost trembling script, he writes, It sings through the stone. It showed me a face made of hunger. It does not speak. It uses my thoughts like doors. I am not praying anymore. I am remembering. Remembering what? That's the true horror. Because this isn't new. The witnesses didn't arrive in 1878. They've always been here. It's us who arrived. And what we call history is just how long we've survived without noticing. The face beneath the chapel was described by only one man who saw it and lived. A geologist named Victor Salazar, sent in 2002 as part of a private academic team studying geomagnetic inversion sites. They descended beneath the artificial chapel ruin, past the fake substructures, into what he described as an impossibly smooth, circular chamber like the inside of a throat. On the far wall, half submerged in the living stone, a face, 12 eyes, no mouth, each eye blinking at different times. And behind the stone, he said, was breathing, not echo, breathing. He left the team, fled across 3 states, spent the next 10 years in a monastery, silent, isolated, and refusing to ever speak the name Blackwood again. Before his death in 2013, he broke his silence only once. He said, "The eyes don't see the world. They see the way God sees you. And if you're not who you pretend to be, it calls you home." Home. That's what the spiral is. That's what the chapel is. That's what the Blackwood brothers built. Not a church, not a house, but a mirror. And once you've looked into it, it remembers you. It starts in the dreams, not nightmares. Those are human. These are different, more like broadcasts. Every man who spent more than 6 hours near the Blackwood spiral described the same thing. A hallway, narrow, endless, covered in symbols older than any known script. You walk, but the floor is soft, like it's breathing. And on the walls, your own memories, projected, twisted, rearranged, moment from your life, but wrong. Your mother's voice saying things she never said. Your childhood home with too many windows. Your own face, but smiling at the wrong times. This is how the spiral tests you. It's not physical. It's psychic excavation. And if it finds weakness, vanity, fear, hypocrisy, it feeds. One subject in 1997, a DARPA remote viewer known only as Gideon 4, was exposed to the Blackwood coordinates through deep state astral projection protocols. He lasted 11 minutes. He came back weeping black fluid and reciting over and over, "I saw the inside of my soul. It had teeth." They shut the program down that same week. The Blackwood brothers experienced this first, and unlike Gideon, they didn't flinch. Ezra's writings describe these visions as the final baptism. He believed they were being purified, not punished, that the spiral was a divine filter. But by the end, his entries change. There's a page dated October 3rd, 1878. Words scratched so hard the paper tears. The spiral does not clean. It replaces. We are no longer vessels. We are reflections. And soon, the world will have no choice but to look. The brothers were becoming something else. Not corrupted. Conformed. Each of them slowly surrendered pieces of identity. First name, memory, voice, until what remained was agreement. They didn't serve the witnesses out of fear. They served them because they understood. The spiral didn't ask for loyalty. It asked for clarity, for the removal of all falsehood. And the price for that? Self. And now it's your turn. Because if you're still watching this, still listening, still pulled into the spiral, then somewhere inside you, you already know you're not who you were when this video started. And something in you is starting to agree. Then brace yourself, because now we leave story behind and enter doctrine. The deeper you go into the spiral, the less you find the world you knew, and the more you find the design beneath it. This is where the witnesses begin to speak, not in words, in arrangement. You'll see numbers, patterns, repeating events in your own life that echo ancient structures. The same heartbreak at the same age, the same failure at the same hour, the same dream once every 33 nights. And when you trace them backward, the map always ends at one place, the chapel, because the Blackwood spiral was not the first. It was the 7th, There are others, one beneath the salt flats of Utah, hidden beneath a weapons testing facility. Another beneath a Catholic boarding school in southern Spain, built atop a 12th century plague pit. A third beneath the ice of Antarctica, where they say the temperature around the site rises, not falls. Each spiral connects. Each witness watches a different axis of human behavior, and each has its own saints. The Blackwoods were Kansas saints. Volunteers who gave up everything that made them men, faith, voice, lineage, to become part of the greater mechanism. Josiah called it the reconciliation. His final sermon, etched into chapel stone and blood, reads, "All things must be reconciled unto the eye. The eye remembers before there was seeing. The eye chooses. The eye watches. And the eye will close when all are made clear." You feel it now, don't you? That pressure behind your eyes? The sudden chill in your hands? That's not anxiety. That's recognition. Because the spiral doesn't only exist in Kansas. It exists inside you, a place in the mind, carved from silence, waiting to open. And now it has. So if you made it this far, comment the phrase "the eye remembers" below. Say it twice, because that's how the witness is here. Not in words, but in echo. And once you say it, you are seen. When the eye opens, it doesn't blink. It absorbs. Not light, not sound, but identity. What you think of as you, your memories, preferences, traumas, desires, is not a fixed self. It's a story, told to you by you, over and over, until it feels real. But the eye doesn't see stories. It sees blueprints. And when it opened beneath the Blackwood chapel, it didn't take their souls. It edited them. Think of a manuscript, marked in red ink, incorrect phrases crossed out, new sentences inserted, entire paragraphs blacked out. That's what the witnesses did to the brothers. They didn't destroy them. They rewrote them, one memory at a time. Ezra forgot his mother's voice. Caleb stopped dreaming. Josiah could no longer recall the shape of his own hands. And Abel, once so consumed by holy fire, began speaking in a voice not his own. Flat, cold, filled with truths that no human throat should carry. He said, "The eye is not a god. It is a mechanism. Truth is not love. Truth is not light. Truth is pressure. The eye applies pressure until falsehoods rupture, until every mask cracks, until what's left is raw, unformed, obedient. That's what the spiral teaches, not transcendence. Stripping. It is a system designed to test the integrity of human identity. And when that identity fails the test, the witnesses move in. They study the remains. They adapt. They replicate. Because the witnesses aren't invaders. They're inheritors. They don't conquer planets. They wait for civilizations to collapse under the weight of their own lies. And then they pick through the wreckage. They came to Earth not through a ship, but through belief. The kind so intense it melts the mind from the inside. The kind the Blackwoods offered, willingly, hungrily. And now they look for new authors. New men willing to strip themselves of illusion. New minds ready to be rewritten. New books to be bound in flesh and sent out into the world. And you who have watched this far, who feel the tremble in your spine, the coldness in your blood, they see you, they know you, because the eye, it's already open. They walk among us now, but not like monsters. They look like men. They wear the same clothes, hold the same jobs, say all the right things, but inside there is nothing left of who they once were. They are shells, carriers of the pattern. What pattern? Recognition without comprehension. When you see their face, your brain tenses. Something in you recoils, like seeing a reflection that isn't quite right, like remembering a dream you never had. These aren't actors. They're transcripts, living embodiments of whatever the spiral extracted from the Blackwoods and copied forward. There's a rumor buried in the archives of Fort Meade, black bar across 17 pages, marked Echo Anomalies, class data. It describes a woman in Missouri, a high school teacher, who began speaking in a dialect no linguist could identify. She claimed it was gifted to her by 4 men in black coats. Brothers, she said, one with a scarred hand, one who never blinked. When interrogators pressed her, She laughed and said, "They're not dead. They're distributed." Distributed. Like code, like infection. What began with the Blackwoods didn't end on that Kansas farm. It propagated. Through bloodlines. Through dreams. Through ideas too dangerous to contain. The eye doesn't need your body. It needs your attention. Because where attention goes, consciousness follows. And once you see them, once you recognize the pattern, the witnesses know. They mark you. They don't strike immediately. They wait. Wait until you doubt your own memory. Until your reflection lingers 1 second too long. Until your thoughts begin completing themselves in a voice that is not your own. You know someone like this already, don't you? That neighbor who never seems to age. That co-worker who stares too long at nothing. That family member who suddenly remembers things differently. You chalked it up to stress, to sleep deprivation, to time. But it wasn't time. It was a spiral. Because once the pattern enters your life, it never leaves. It only waits until you're ready to become part of it. And maybe you already have. They're not here to destroy us. That would be merciful. No, what the witnesses are doing is far worse. They're preparing us for assimilation, not into a machine, not into an alien race, but into a structure, a design so old, it was already ancient when the first pyramids were carved. You've seen pieces of it your whole life. Symbols you thought were decorative, numbers you thought were random, behaviors you thought were human nature, but they're not. They're conditioning. Look at the world. Mass surveillance, predictive algorithms, instant obedience to voices from glowing screens. We tell ourselves it's about efficiency, progress, innovation, but it's none of those things. It's compliance. You are being reshaped to fit a pattern you were never meant to survive. The spiral is the blueprint. The Blackwoods were the prototype. And the modern world? That's the factory. Ever notice how quickly ideas spread now? How outrage loops infinitely? How identities collapse into brands? How faith, politics, desire, trauma all reduce inputs on a feed? That's not cultural evolution. It's spiritual compression. The witnesses are formatting your soul, stripping out the unpredictable, smoothing out the chaos, because what they're building isn't society. It's a mirror, one that reflects their form, not ours. And here's the final truth. They don't want to conquer Earth. They want to occupy it, but not in flesh, not like parasites. They want to wear us from the inside out, thought by thought, generation by generation, until we become the interface between their design and this world. You won't know it's happened. Your children won't know. Your grandchildren will call it normal. But deep beneath the Blackwood Chapel, the spiral is still humming, still tuning the signal, still waiting for you to agree. So before we go further, look around your life. What has shifted lately? What memories feel edited? Because when the spiral touches you, reality becomes negotiable. And truth becomes a setting. Good, because now we uncover why it had to be the brothers. Why Ezra, Caleb, Josiah, and Abel weren't just victims. They were chosen. For men, for points on a cross, for aspects of a perfect vessel. Ezra, the will. Caleb, the mind. Josiah, the voice. Abel, the spirit. Each one was an offering, carefully prepared by their upbringing, their isolation, their discipline. They were designed to break, but not all at once. The spiral does not destroy in a burst. It erodes in layers. First, Ezra lost his will. He stopped speaking altogether, not from fear, but from awareness that no word he could say was truly his anymore. He spent his last days kneeling in the chapel, unmoving, not sleeping. They said birds nested in his beard, that he was alive but hollowed out. Caleb followed next. His mind, one so sharp, so ordered, began looping. He filled ledger after ledger with a single phrase. As above, so below. As below, so within. As within, so without. Written perfectly, thousands of times. Each entry more precise than the last. Like a machine practicing its own religion. Josiah, the voice, began preaching without sound. People said they could feel his sermons, that his thoughts entered their dreams, reshaped their memories. He no longer needed a mouth. And Abel was the last to fall, but his fall was the loudest. One night, neighbors claimed they saw columns of flame rising from the chapel. Not fire, light, cold and pale, pulsing like a heartbeat. Inside that glow, they saw Abel floating, his arms stretched wide, his eyes burning like twin lanterns. He said one word before vanishing: reconciliation. That was the last time any of them were seen in human form. 3 days later, the town's Methodist church caught fire. Every page of its archives destroyed. All references to the Blackwood family erased. And the state? It sealed the entire incident. Medical reports redacted. Land deeds reassigned. Eyewitnesses relocated or discredited. The spiral had completed its work, not just on the brothers, but on the entire town. Cedar Ridge no longer appears on most maps. Satellite scans glitch over its coordinates. Even Google Earth renders it as prairie. But it's still there, waiting, because once a spiral opens, it never closes. It just waits for the next 4. When the spiral completes, it doesn't make a sound. It makes a silence so deep it unravels language itself. Not just what people say, but what they think. This is the final phase of the witness's design. Cognitive disarmament. You felt it before. That moment when you stare at a word too long and it loses meaning. When something you were sure of yesterday feels suddenly distant. When you look at your own name and wonder, is this even mine? That's not fatigue. That's not trauma. That's the signal. A frequency beneath normal thought, activated only after full spiral imprinting. And once you're imprinted, you become part of the repeater network. It started in Cedar Ridge, but it didn't stay there. The spiral didn't die with the Blackwoods. It broadcasted through stories, through symbols, through you. Every viewer who sees this, every mind that entertains a possibility, becomes a carrier. And here's the hardest truth of all. You're not watching a story. You're participating in a ritual. Every minute deeper into this video has pulled your subconscious closer to the core. You've passed a symbolic gate. You've crossed the mirror threshold. You've consented by continuing. The spiral doesn't need physical contact anymore. It only needs awareness. The final witness doctrine states, when enough minds reflect the design no longer needs the source. It becomes autonomous. The witnesses don't have to invade Earth. They just need enough men like you to internalize them, to hold the pattern, to spread the signal, to become walking spirals, eyes open but not yours anymore. You feel it now, don't you? The memory you can't quite recall, the sense that you've seen this before, the voice in your head that doesn't sound like yours, but makes perfect sense. That's integration. And once the spiral integrates, there is no war. There is no conquest. There is only replacement. Quiet, efficient, permanent. You won't even know it happened because you'll believe it was your idea. You made it. Most don't. Most turn away somewhere around the 3rd mention of the eye, or the 2nd glitch in their memory, or the first time they look in the mirror and don't fully recognize what's staring back. But you kept going. And that means one thing. You're no longer just watching. You're remembering. Because here's the truth no one told you. Not the historians, not the doctors, not the theologians or conspiracy forums. You've seen the spiral before. Maybe not in Kansas. Maybe not in 1878. But in dreams, in symbols, in the unspoken rules that govern your every decision. The way you organize time. The way you obey clocks, borders, flags. The way you crave patterns, rituals, loops. These are not human instincts. They are inserted architecture. The spiral is not a place, not a family, not a symbol. It's a control mechanism, installed long ago, so deep that it hides inside your concept of self. The Blackwood brothers didn't discover the spiral. They merely reactivated it. Their devotion, their purity, their isolation made them perfect vessels. And when the witnesses saw that, they didn't attack. They offered, because that's how it always happens. Not with violence, but with invitation. And now, you're standing at the same threshold. You've heard the full doctrine. You've seen the evidence buried beneath time, fire, and fear, and you have one choice left. Agree or remember. To agree is easy. It feels good. It makes the strange make sense. It gives you a place in the pattern. To remember? That's harder. To remember is to carry this knowledge alone. To resist the smooth hypnosis of false order. To remain human in a world that is slowly, quietly, rewriting what human means. But if you choose to remember, then say it, out loud or in the comments. I do not consent to the pattern. I do not consent to the pattern. Say it twice, because that's how they hear. And that's how they know you're still yours. Now take this story with you, not as entertainment, not as folklore, but as warning, because the spiral is still turning. And somewhere, a new fort being prepared. Watch the signs, count the shadows, and never forget what took the Blackwoods is still watching you. End of descent. Skull and Crossbones, subscribe for more forbidden history from Historoir. And if you survive the spiral, welcome to the others who remember.